This episode of the WP Minute is brought to you by OmniSend. Do you sell stuff online? Then you need to meet OmniSend, the powerful yet refreshingly intuitive email and SMS tool that helps you make $73 for every dollar spent. OmniSend is that good and effective. You probably know the struggles of investing in digital ads with no guarantee it'll bring money back into your pocket. Use OmniSend and you won't have to find creative ways to make your audience notice you. You just talk straight to them. Use OmniSend pop-ups to build a contact list, then send campaigns directly to people who already want to hear from you. Automate everything with OmniSend. Just set it up once, sit back, and watch those sales roll in. If this sounds too good to be true, check it out at omnisend.com. Visit omnisend.com. Tell them thanks for sponsoring the WP Minute. Hey, Kurt, welcome to the WP Minute.
Matt, thanks a lot for having me, man. This is great. This is the first time we've really chatted.
Yeah, without I'll say the distraction.
Without the round table.
Without the round table, without the lovely Jonathan Denwood hosting over at the WP Tonic. You are a regular there. You're the official co-host, I'd say. I mean, that's how I perceive it.
It feels like it. He sends me invites every week and I show up.
You got into WordPress through an interesting route. I think I heard you once say that you were working at a motorcycle dealership or you owned a motorcycle dealership. What's the backstory?
So I have a backstory in automotive service. I mean, if we really go back. And, those are 13, 14 hours a day, standing on concrete, arguing with people from sun up to sundown. And after we had our first child, I realized I was only seeing my baby girl on Sundays. She was asleep when I went to work. She was asleep when I came home from work. And I said, well, this just ain't going to work, man. And I was getting older. We had kids late. And so I was like, this ain't going to work. And so what were the things that, interested me? I would build websites as a hobby, like with Dreamweaver and stuff. And I experimented with Drupal and Joomla and a couple of other things. And I helped some nonprofits out with some stuff like hobbies, like most of us agencies do. But then eventually I found WordPress in 2004 and I was like, this is different. I kind of like this. And then by 2008, the economy had taken a real hard dip. That 13 hours of standing on your feet at the car dealership made you about $35. And I told my wife, I said, this is not financially feasible. I'm not going to do this anymore. And so I literally just hung my tile and said, hey, I'm a web guy. I'll help you make a website. And I took on a ton of startups and super cheap projects and christened myself through fire. And Mañana No Mas was born.
We have a similar background because I came up in the auto industry. My family owned car dealerships, was once Mazda, Isuzu, and Peugeot, then merged into or migrated over to General Motors, Cadillac, Oldsmobile, and Chevrolet at the time.
That's a heck of a migration.
Yeah, it's quite the migration. My grandfather actually started one of the very first Mazda dealerships in the country, right, when they first came to America. I've spent a lot of time in every facet of the auto industry as a dealer, from doing landscaping around the dealership to washing cars, delivering parts, service writer, parts delivery, and then the consumer internet came and I was the only one who knew how that stuff worked. So I quickly became the internet salesperson when that first came onto the scene. There's a lot of, I've always said, like, there's a lot that you learn in that business, right? So long as you're like, really trying to deliver a great experience for a customer and do right by the customer, there's a lot of great lessons there, especially in service writing. As a service writer, yeah, I noticed you said you're spending a lot of time maybe arguing with folks on the lot because you're trying to explain to them how this thing is getting fixed, what goes into it. There's literal man hours that you're tracking. There's parts. So there's logistics. Sometimes you don't have the part. You got to go get the part. The part's delayed. The part is not the right part. Now you're scrambling and you're getting all this in and you're trying to do this all under budget or to the budget you presented to the customer. It sounds very much like web design. There's a great similarity there.
So many transferable skills there. And you really hit on one of the things that drove me. And that was that customer relationship, that customer, interface. I was so discontent after 2 decades in the automotive industry that I wrote and published a book called Service Writing in Black and White. And I didn't write it to sell it. I wrote it to flush this crud out of my brain. And when I did, I just self-published it and put it up and thought, well, that's it. It's done. Matt, people bought the dang book. and then I panicked because it was poorly written. I had to go and do a second version of it. But one of the customers was Ducati North America, the motorcycle company. And I'd worked at a ton of dealerships, and my hobby was racing motorcycles. And, your dream is always like, oh, if I could work for one of the big OEMs, that'd be awesome. And out of the blue, they called up one day and said, can you write us a course for service writers? And that led to a decade of working with Ducati, both as a contractor and as a full-time employee. And then I graduated from Ducati to Suzuki. Branding wise, it seems like a big step backwards to go from Ducati to Suzuki. But what people don't recognize is Suzuki is so much bigger of a company. So then I was working with automotive, marine, motorcycle. I was in charge of publications and training. And that e-learning that you're hearing me talk about now, that became the foundation for the stuff that I do with WP Tonic, Lifter LMS, and of course, Mañana No Mas.
There's an element to what I like about the agency game. This might not come off sounding too good, but there's an element to the agency space where you sort of you build up a portfolio, you build up some brand recognition, and it gives you a little bit of confidence, and you can say things like, well, hey, when you come to me, the website costs $5,000. Well, the guy down the street says it's $2,500. Yeah, okay, great, but the guy down the street is not us, and it's not our process, it's not our portfolio. Mine is $5,000. That was something that I learned literally selling parts for General Motors, because it was when you presented the problem to the customer. Hey, you need a new whatever carburetor for your motor. You go, do you want the General Motors part, or do you want whatever I don't remember the name of the parts, AC Delco parts, or whatever those parts were. And you were selling on, do you want the brand recognition that's 5 times more expensive, or do you want the cheaper one? And it just gets you into this mode of presenting the problem and massaging the brand and upselling. And I know it sounds tough, but these are things that you go through in the automotive world, at least back then, where that's what was profitable, selling these parts, selling this experience, selling the service. And ultimately, if the customer trusted you, they invested their dollars with you. And as long as you're fixing the problem in the right way and delivering it back, and it's a nice clean car, it smells fresh, you don't hand it back to them filthy from the technician, or like oil stains. Like, these are things that people might just go over their heads, but from a brand and customer experience, these are great stories.
And it all stems from, your root skills in communication and leadership. And I became a lifetime student of leadership, and I studied, all the big names, John Maxwell especially. I went and got my certification with that for public speaking and training. And that to me is what drives, the root success of all of these different verticals and platforms that I've had experience in.
I'd imagine, like, so writing the book, like, you didn't have any expectations of selling it? Were you doing any other sort of online communication or blogging or podcasting at that time when you did that?
I put out a couple of Twitter posts, back when it was Twitter. So that was 2007, right? So I put out a couple of Twitter posts. I made a website called servicewriterbook.com. I thought, well, that sounds like it's SEO, powered, right? What is it? It's a service writer book. And like I said, people just started buying it. And then I didn't even have it on Amazon for like the first 5 years. I was just letting it do its own thing. And then finally I said, I should probably put it in Amazon and see if it does anything there. And what's really weird is sometimes I'll see used versions of it for sale. And I'm like, someone actually bought that paperback and they wanted to sell it used? I'm kind of flattered, but I'm kind of mortified.
Yeah. Imagine if you signed it, how much more valuable that would be.
That's weird. I used to have students at Ducati bring me a copy of the book and ask me to sign it in class when I was the trainer. And I was like, it's such a surreal experience. I wrote my second book and published that in 22. And that one's a general leadership book. And I did the same kind of game plan for that. I made a website. I put up a sister course. Obviously, e-learning's my game. Put up a sister course and put out a couple of posts about action leadership from the edge, and copies started to sell. In that case, I made it also a digital book that you could download off of Amazon. And I just let it do its own thing. I didn't do any of that, any of the scams to become a #1 rated book or bestseller or any of that stuff. I just let the book naturally, organically do its thing. And I just focus on my day-to-day running my agency and my business.
I want to talk about what you do at Lifter and what you do at Mañana No Mas, where you've titled yourself Web Dude. But before we get there, what's in the WordPress air these days is, what is WordPress? WordPress is too challenging. WordPress doesn't know where it's going. There's a lot of, debate back and forth of, are we still a publishing system? Are we a content management system? Are we a web building workflow tool? Are we a Lifter or an LMS basis for an LMS? What's missing here, in your opinion? Like, lengthy conversations. Is it marketing? Is it education? Like, what's missing, if anything, in your eyes of like where WordPress sits for the end user? What is it? Who should be using it? What's the missing link for this stuff?
To me, and these are just personal thoughts of Kurt, right? So all those things that you said, what is WordPress? Is it a CMS? Is it this? Is it that? Is it? The sad part of it is that yes. It's all of that, which makes the messaging horribly muddled and spread out. I do challenge people that are seriously opinionated, though, like the folks that go, this is broken and this user interface is wrong and this is 2 clicks to get here. And I see that and I get that. I do. I've been in the platform since 2004, and I do understand a lot of the, armchair quarterbacking that we can do on the product as it's built. But I've also introduced WordPress to literally hundreds of clients as a new product. And to me, it is like handing a toddler an iPad. Within 5 or 10 minutes, they figure out what they're going to touch, click on, or get to make a cartoon go across the screen. And I find that almost the dumber someone is, the more fresh they are to the platform, almost the easier the adoption is. Someone that has come up with Classic Editor and then been through the block editor and the growth pains of that, and then to get into full site editing, it's almost like there's so many facets of things that have worked in their past that create mental blocks to go forward. If I'm making any sense,
Yeah.
It's for me to articulate that. And then you add to that, you got the bricks conversation, the Elementor conversation, the Divi conversation, the Beaver builder. And sometimes I think, I definitely need a page builder to knock this out. And other times I go, you know what, I'm just going to try Cadence and see what I can do in Cadence. And magically, Cadence seems to work pretty dang good.
WordPress has been around for 20 years. I'll oversimplify this and then love your thoughts on this. So for the first 5 years, like, you had to be a hardcore techie developer. Like, you weren't, for the first 5 years, was there the magic 5-minute install? I'm not really sure. I forget the first 5 years, but you really had to be like super techie to get this thing off the ground. From, years 5 through 10, then there were folks like, I think me, when I came into it, who I was not a developer, but I was able to use a LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, and like put this thing up there. Because remember, there wasn't managed WordPress hosting like we all enjoy today. There was a cPanel one-click installer, but not every web host was using that back then. So you had to be like a power user. Ultimately, you were curious and willing to learn. And then the back half of this second decade is when we really saw the user who came in through, let's say, the Elementors and the page builders of the world that really exposed WordPress to building websites through their particular lens. Again, whatever it was, Beaver Builder, Elementor, Divi, Bricks. And my theory is why folks are so vocal in year 20 is that it's been 20 years, which is an infinite amount of time in tech land. But it's this new core user of WordPress who came in from a product perspective, who had all these issues that we all learned in the past smoothed over by UI and UX, albeit still challenging, but much more easier to use than our first 10 years of WordPress, who are now like, hey, I've been using this for 5 years. When is it getting better? And these folks, it's largely attached to their livelihood, their web business, their marketing firm, their SEO practice. And they're like, we need to make this thing better. And they're a lot more vocal, maybe not in the best ways, but they're a lot more vocal, and they're doing it in pockets across the community, Facebook groups, YouTube live streams. Like, it's a whole new set of user. That's my feeling. That's why it's so pronounced these days. What are your thoughts?
I agree with much of what you just said, but I drive back to use case and overall audience and community. Right. So like a lot of times I hear things about, and I'll just go right into like automations and CRM integrations. And, is this going to be a Zapier thing or a WP Fusion thing? Or why do I have to do this? And how come this doesn't come out of the box? And you get these assumptions or these dang near entitlements, right? Where people are like, this should be this way out of the box. And there's a really major part of me that's like, no, that's not what this was built for decades ago. Like even through its development, the idea that every single site can be a do-it-yourselfer, out-of-the-box success, plug-and-play kind of thing, to me is kind of crazy. I mean, that's why there's experts and agencies around that do builds. A lot of times I find myself telling potential clients how to do something. And this is a big mistake for me. I'll say, oh, well, in this case, we're going to plug in this CRM, and then we're going to take that CRM and hook it to an automation. We're going to use this recipe to automate this with this. And then people that sign into this form are going to get this tag, and this tag is going to, and so you know the rest of the story, right? I'm telling this all out. The audience that I'm talking to doesn't care about any of that. They have a pain point. They want a web professional to fix it. And I think when we get into those level of conversations, we have to remember that we are the web professionals and we are the people that can answer those questions, solve those pain points, and turn a profit doing it. I think we make the mistake, like I've done multiple times myself, of trying to explain all of this stuff to people from a do-it-yourselfer perspective, when that's not. If I was building SaaS platforms, I wouldn't be explaining to everybody that bought the SaaS platform how I put it together. Right. I'd just be saying, What you want? You want an automated calendar thing with an email function? I got that. Here you go. And that would be it. But in the WordPress space, we seem to get hooked on which plugins, which tools, which this, which that. And I think to the point that we drive a wedge of communication between professionals and potential clients. And when you give people that level of information that they didn't really ask for, you imply to them that they're responsible for their own website or that they must assume a do-it-yourself perspective. And sometimes we drive them away. We drive them to another source. I mean, not for nothing. I'm in the e-learning space. So I thought, you know what? Everyone keeps asking for the Udemy experience. I should probably put a course on Udemy. What a nightmare. Like from a user perspective. You know, I had to add the course. I had to tick all their boxes. I had to verify who I was. I had all these things to do. And I'm not lying. I put that course up 6 months ago, and to this day, I'm still getting spam from putting a course on that website. Everybody wants to help me sell my Udemy course. I had a friend jump into Kajabi. I jumped into the back end of Kajabi to try and help them with something. And I thought, how in the world does what I'm seeing on the back end of this website resemble anything from the front end of the website? You know, it's just a huge disconnect compared to our experience in WordPress. But we've all made this assumption that SaaS makes it easier. And that's not necessarily the case. I think it's very use case driven, and we have to examine who our audience is for each instance. And in a lot of cases, the audience that we're talking to isn't even concerned with the stuff you and I were just talking about with the development of WordPress and the UX and the UI and the this and the that. They just want something that works.
So from a user's perspective, especially in the e-learning world, do they choose WordPress because they found a professional and that professional says, well, I only use WordPress? Or have they tried those other platforms and found the limitations and instead found WordPress to be much more flexible, but albeit with a bigger learning curve? And maybe they need to hire somebody. What do you think from the user's perspective do they see, choosing, Lifter and then hiring you at your agency? Like from the user's perspective, where do they come in from?
From the user's perspective, I am dealing with two very separate audiences, Matt. Pardon me. And my agency, as far as I know, is one of the only ones really going after the second one. So for agencies in the space, I'm giving you my magic sauce. The first one, those are course creators. Those are people that, have either seen the dude posing next to his Lamborghini, hey, the e-learning is growing and you can make $1 million, right? And everyone goes, oh, I want to do that. And they do the research and they come up with LearnDash, Lifter LMS, Tutor LMS, being your top 3 searches. And then they start, going down, and then they start the, feature benefit, right? Feature benefit versus dollar spent. What are they going to pick? And so in a lot of cases, I see people come to Lifter LMS from that type of search. And a lot of times they really don't even know what they really want. They just heard somewhere that they can make a side hustle out of producing an online course. The other audience is completely the opposite of what you think. It's someone that doesn't want WordPress at all, right? It is, so the first group is, they're the ones that may have sampled Kajabi or Udemy, but realize they need their own platform, which leads to WordPress. The second group are people that don't want WordPress. They explicitly do not want WordPress. And that's the group I am specifically targeting right now. Those are enterprise level corporations that have very, I'll say technical, but I don't believe it's technical, SCORM content that they make their learning content in. So there's a very specific course authoring software. And typically these enterprise corporations would have a special built learning management system built just for that SCORM content. Typically, those are very expensive, and newsflash, they usually kind of suck. So they don't look good, they don't function good, they play the content and they do the reporting, but everything else is horrible, and it's super expensive. So when I learned that I could take that SCORM content and I could effectively run it through a Lifter LMS website, for instance, and I'll just give you real numbers, I have a corporate client that spent $500,000 developing their LMS, $400,000 a year for maintenance and hosting. The website barely worked, and they only had 2,500 users enrolled in the system. By the time I worked it out, I told them, I said, you could hire me to drive across the country and teach people in person for that kind of budget. Like, what are we doing? That's crazy. And then I was like, we could do this in Lifter LMS on a WordPress build, even with really good hosting, and get you down to about maybe $50,000 a year.
Yeah.
And they were like, we're not ready for that kind of change yet. And that was the inspiration moment for me to go, I need to make this more public. I need to let more corporations understand that there's agencies like ours that you don't have to be a do-it-yourselfer, right? We can give you the service and the maintenance and the hosting, and we can do all that for you, but it ain't $400,000 a year.
Yeah.
It's like $50,000 a year. We update your plugins. You give us the content. We'll load it up for you. It's good to go.
There's that whole enterprise world or bigger business side of WordPress world is one that isn't explored enough. I mean, as a decade-long agency owner and then somebody who worked at Pagely for enterprise hosting, I kind of know why. Like technically, I know why. Also, look, there's a lot of agencies that push into marketing for enterprise. This is a deeper conversation, but at the end of the day, I think it sort of boils down to maybe a lot of people are just afraid to give away the secret sauce and give away maybe that blueprint because they're also trying to approach that. Like they don't want to tell other people that there's a lot of opportunity in the upper markets of WordPress. You also have to deliver and be able to package and present yourself where an enterprise is going to say yes to you. Like in that example where they might be spending $500,000, maybe somebody comes in and goes, I can do it for free. And they go, no, please. Like, there's no time for that here. Right. And bigger business. I was just having this conversation with Mark Szymanski on one of the recent episodes is once a big enterprise client says yes to WordPress, that's an investment for many years. Right. So it doesn't always, I think the service provider in the WordPress space who's just learning these new levels of client, don't undercut yourself, don't undersell yourself because there's a lot here. You might be thinking, oh, the software is free, but managing and working with these clients is going to be a whole different ballgame. Just to get through them to say yes and sign your contract is going to be an experience that you said, oh, I should have added another zero to the end of this thing.
The sales pipeline is exhausting.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Do you have what is the experience when they say, oh, you can do this stuff, but it's WordPress? Do you ever get that kickback where they go, oh man, WordPress? But then you say, well, I'm going to make it better for you. But is there an initial pushback on WordPress, just the brand?
I'm going to say 5 years ago. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. In 2024, not so much. Because now we're into pain point selling, right? We're into what's your pain point? I can help fix that. Especially with COVID, a lot of these corporations were locked into these building deals and sent people to work from home. And then they had these other expenses. And, in a lot of cases, well, I worked at Suzuki, and Suzuki right at the beginning of COVID had large layoffs, just huge layoffs. They closed the entire training division. When you look at what some companies are having to make decisions with, when you can come in and say, hey, for about 14% of what you're currently paying for your training tech, I can not only maintain it, but I can actually make it better. I can make it a better experience for your users. And if they give you any, if they say, what's it on? And that conversation rarely comes up, to be honest with you. At the corporate level, they just want to know that the website works. Yeah. But if they say on what platform, and I say WordPress, if there's any backlash from that. It's gotten a lot easier when you say what was good enough for the White House, it was good enough for NASA. I'm pretty sure we can make, your website work.
Yeah.
And the thing to remember, when I'm talking about enterprise e-learning projects on SCORM, I'm not talking about millions of users and high bandwidth requirements and stuff like that. They typically have between 1 and 5,000 users, and active users in a month might be 400 or 500 people.
Yeah.
So I'm not dealing with huge numbers. It's not like I'm running Facebook on WordPress.
Yeah. What are some use cases for these more enterprise types? Sales enablement comes to mind, where there's a team that needs sales enablement training and education. Typical onboarding, like, hey, welcome to the company. Take these 5 courses to learn what we do here. What are the samples of use cases that you've seen through your work?
So my number one sales use case during COVID was exactly what you just said with the onboarding, because I would target companies and I would say, hey, your ads are advertising that this is a remote position. How do you onboard people? And they would say, oh, we bring them into the office for a week and blah, blah, blah. I said, so you hire someone for a remote position and the first thing you do is bring them to the office for a week. It's probably not a good optic. What if we could take all that, make it digital, and you could do all that stuff through Zoom and digital signatures and offer it through a course and lesson structure? Better yet, what if I could put those Zoom calls and embed those Zoom calls into your course and lesson structure so that you keep everything organized and recorded properly? And they're like, you can do that? And I go, yeah. And then when you say that's 15 grand or 18 grand or 50 grand, it's still a bargain compared to what their IT department was paying before they met you.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing to remember, is that the number's the number. Never be afraid of sharing the number. Whatever the number is, you throw it out there, because it is what it is. And amazingly, it's been pretty successful. The higher the number, the less aggravation I seem to have with the client as well.
You might have a different answer, but I would imagine that it's less. This is going to be funny, but it might be less painful on the design side of things. Like when I was in the business, I was just largely selling marketing sites. And it was just like, oh, that shade of blue is not what the C-suite wants. Can we look at many shades of blue? And I'm like, oh God, why do I keep doing this business? I would imagine building out these structural applications for people is a lot less painful on that side of things, or maybe not.
The better the enterprise is, I shouldn't say better, the more developed the enterprise is, the better the experience for the agency. Meaning, they have a style guide. They've got a branding guide. So I go to them and I say, you have a marketing department? They say, yes. I go, excellent. Send me a copy of your style and your branding guides. I want to make sure that what we create for you meets your style and branding guides, and that your marketing department is going to be happy with what we develop for you.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh. And then when they learn, because remember, most companies have a training site or an HR site and a sales site and a CRM site and a. And when you start to develop your LMS product, and then you start to say, hey, this is an LMS, but it's also a CMS. And if you want to surround your learning channel with some of your marketing messaging or some of your sales pages or some of your landing pages, well, then you can start to see some of those windows in their brains open up, and they go, wait a minute, we could do everything on this. Well, yeah, we're a full service agency. We can fill all the blanks. My main focus was on getting your learning stuff up.
Yeah.
And then we found that this is Chris Badgett's line, by the way. I'm stealing from Chris. He says, oh, dude, I just love the way you land and expand.
Does he say it in that voice?
He doesn't say it in that voice. That voice is kind of creepy. Chris is much less creepy. But he says, I just love the way you land and expand. Yeah. But that's it. It's see a need, fill a need, right? That's the thing with sales. And just have a good relationship and provide value. Solution-based
selling. There's a lot of folks that get into their WordPress services and they start building those websites, and they really start to dislike that experience, and they give up, right? It's just so stressful. They've said, I started my WordPress web agency because I didn't want a full-time job, and now I have this full-time job, and I don't like dealing with these clients. This is why I like the agency structure you've built, the model you've built, because it takes away, or it can. I mean, it obviously depends on who you are and what you want to do. But when you're excited about solving problems with WordPress, it doesn't always have to be, let me make you a brochure site. It can be a Lifter LMS site. It can be e-learning. And I talk about this all the time with my work at Gravity Forms. Gravity Forms allows you to do that too. You start selling the ability to connect to different add-ons that we have, and it just ranks you up. Like one day you're selling a website to somebody because you have a great MailChimp add-on, and then the next day you're like, oh, there's a HubSpot add-on, and now I'm in this whole other echelon of customers that I'm servicing because of Gravity Forms and this add-on, et cetera, et cetera. Solution-based selling, fantastic for the WordPress freelancer who's like, I'm not happy with where I'm at, and I can build up this other solution. So kudos to you for finding that.
Well, one of the most important distinctions in what you just said is the difference between a freelancer and an agency. And I was a freelancer for the longest time. And I was contracting with Lifter and WP Tonic. And I was, to your point, pumping out all these crazy hours. I would say yes to these projects and I thought were going to be easy. And then they all expanded or scope creeped or something. And then I realized, what were my strengths in the corporate world? I was a really good project manager. I was really good at identifying people's skill sets and putting them to work on what they did best. And that's when I realized, hey, just because I'm working out of my home doesn't mean I can't leverage the skills and talents of other team members. And then I started adding to the team, and I started networking with other people in the WordPress space, in the community. Right. So me and Michelle Frechette, she actually referred me for a talk that I got. I mean, it's like there's so many people, positive people in the space that you can connect to. And everyone assumes it has to be for money. It's not for money. It's about making that connection. Who's good at what? Who's best at this thing or that thing? And there's been a lot of work that's come in through Mañana No Mas that I've been able to farm out to other people through post status and through the networking that we do. And it's positive net for everybody. Yeah. Everybody gets the work. Everybody works in their strength zone. And in some cases, some of the profit sharing comes through Mañana No Mas as an agency. And in other cases, it's just a referral. But I know that's going to come back to me tenfold for being the right guy anyway.
Yeah. Do you have a team at your agency? Or
Yeah. So I say this publicly a lot, and I should probably stop saying it. But I consider myself graphically handicapped, Matt. I am not creative. Yeah, if someone gives me the style guide, gives me the branding guide, gives me a color palette, I will make you an amazing website. But if you come to me and go, oh, we kind of got this idea for chicken sandwiches we're making on pretzel buns or whatever, and we need you to come up with the logo and the hero image, and I'm like, no, what you need is Michelle. Yeah. Michelle's a graphic girl on my team. She is amazing. She's the only person I've met in my life where I can speak to her, and the next day she'll show me a storyboard of what I said graphically. I mean, she's just amazing. I've used her for curriculum development, course development in the SCORM world, and for marketing stuff. I've got another girl. I think she's up in Wisconsin. She is phenomenal. Young lady. I met her in the marine industry. Turns out she did all the graphics for the marine company I was contracted with. And I said, do you do side work? She said, yes. She's been a part of the team ever since. Yeah. And then I don't do a lot with code. I'm more of a plug and play kind of guy. Yep. So I've got a guy that I leverage for code work and customizations outside of my little home office here.
Yeah. I mean, I think the whole, once again, like this is really should be eye-opening to those who might be thinking about expanding their, freelance work into an agency or refining the processes. Because that was one of the most difficult things that I would run into at the 10 years I ran the agency with my father. Agency still runs today. He runs it largely. He was in the he grew up in the auto industry, owned the car dealerships and such. So there was always this natural friction between he and I about the things I wanted to go after, which was like a lot of us young, foolish people at the time were thinking about, I want to sell products too, man. I want to sell themes and plugins. I want to start a SaaS business because look at all these people starting a SaaS business. Isn't it great? And he was just like, service work. There's, the folks that can change the oils, and then there's the head technician. And the head technician builds the custom site and we're priced at one point, and then there's the oil change type people who just put the sites together and keep them moving. And it wasn't something that I was truly interested in. And of course, agency life, you're always like one paycheck away or one customer check away from bankruptcy when you're running like a custom agency. So there was that challenge of it, plus having kids and really, saying, hey, I just need to lower the stress level at home with kids. But it's certainly the no-code tools, where WordPress is headed. You don't need custom coding for every solution. And you don't need to have somebody on I don't mean this in a bad way, but you don't always need to have an expert engineer on the team for something that comes up 10% of the time, maybe in customer engagements.
Yeah. Yeah. I would go even further. It's for me and my agency, it's not even 10% of the time. There's so much out there that we can leverage. The hard part is staying educated on all of the different tools. What's a good tool? What's a tool to stay away from? What tools work good together? I kind of have a dedicated tech stack that I'm familiar with, that I'm happy with. And I think that is a big key to what we do. The other thing is, when I'm talking to a client, for some reason, a lot of clients just come to the game assuming that they need some kind of customization, or they need this, they need that. And one of the best words I've learned, and that might be from Emily Middleton, is just asking why. You just ask the client, why do you think you need that? And they'll come up with something. But it's like, maybe we should just launch a minimal viable product first. Do a proof of concept, make sure that your idea has traction, and then we can invest in your customizations and your dreams down the road. But, for a lot of folks, what they're saying is a need at the beginning of a project is far from being a need. It's a distant want.
Yeah. Is the world in your agency world, is getting leads and showcasing what you can do, is it done through an LMS? Like, are you selling a course and people are going, aha, this guy knows how to do a course, therefore I will want to hire him, versus looking at a pretty portfolio of a graphic designer?
Yeah. So for me, if my target is that SCORM client, that enterprise SCORM client, I do have a course on scormpress.com and manananomas.com that tells people how to put SCORM into their WordPress website. And so I have that. But Lifter LMS also asked me to make a very similar course, and you can take that for free right at Lifter LMS. Honestly, I don't care if people take the free course or they come and buy the course from Mañana No Mas, because I'm the author and the deliverer of the content. So that drives people to me anyway. In a lot of cases, they'll see the content at Lifter LMS and they'll go, who's this Kurt guy? And if you Google Mañana No Mas, you're going to see 68 pages of Google stuff come up from Mañana No Mas. There's just a ton of content. Yeah. So I really don't worry about how the net works. I just worry that the net does work and funnels people to me, right? The other thing is, I just get as much exposure as I possibly can. I'm talking to you today. I'll be talking to Jonathan on Thursday. I work with Lifter LMS every Thursday, and people are starting to get to know me. And it's, Matt, I've only been connected in the community for 4 or 5 years. I mean, my first WordCamp was the one in San Diego.
Yeah.
So that was 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
3 years ago, I think.
3 years ago. Yeah, so that was my first WordCamp, and I loved it so much that I started going to WordPress meetups. I didn't even know what a WordPress meetup really was before I went to WordCamp. Yeah. I mean, I was in WordPress for 15 years before I realized, there's a whole community out here to support us. And I think that's true for a lot of agencies and freelancers. I think so many don't get plugged in, and the opportunity when you plug in is so large, you actually regret that you didn't do it earlier. Yeah. To the point that I actually Pippin Williamson lives in my town. I just moved to Kansas. Oh, cool. And so Pippin has a brewery here in town. And I told him I wanted to do the WordPress meetup for Hutchinson, Kansas. Yeah. And he goes, dude, if they give it to you, you could just use my brewery for that. So second Tuesday of every month, I'm at Pippin's Brewery down at Sand Hills, drinking IPA and talking WordPress.
That's fantastic. That's instant, instant audience built in.
Yeah. It's just get plugged in, get connected, meet as many people as you can. And if you have an agency that has a product that's unique, like my SCORM content, that's fairly unique, or LMS work, that's fairly unique in the space. That'll net people in, that'll drive people to you. And as an agency, I mean, I don't know what other people are trying to do. I mean, I see all kinds of weird things on post status, how people talk about their successes. In reality, I only need 5 or 6 clients a month. I'm not looking to do hundreds of people a month.
Yeah. Wrapping up, I want to get your thoughts on AI, especially in the LMS space. Half of me is like, and I know Chris Badgett is a proponent on AI, or at least it seems that way on Twitter. I'm still very skeptical of it. I'm curious on how this whole thing plays out. Half of me is thinking, oh God, I could use AI and build a whole course. The other half of me, like, that's the evil side. the angel side is saying, you don't know anything about that course. Don't do it. Like AI will tell you. And you don't do you really know this content? Are you really passionate about this stuff? And I'm worried that there are people who are like, screw it. Like AI will print this whole course for me and I will just put it out there and people will come. That's the way that I kind of like see the impact of how AI is working right now. What are your thoughts on AI, how it impacts e-learning? Do you have, worries like I do on this stuff?
Well, disclaimer, I use AI tools for certain things. So because what I'm about to say is going to sound like I'm a hypocrite. I use AI tools for certain things. The thing that I've noticed with AI is you have to, and people aren't going to agree with this, Matt, but to me, you have to recognize that these systems are biased in certain ways and that you have to recognize that bias, absorb that bias, and then, adjust the rudder accordingly. So I can remember when OpenAI first came out, ChatGPT, I immediately jumped in. I was so excited. I'm an early adopter of a lot of things. And so I jumped in and I was like, oh, let's ask it about this topic. And it said, I can't answer that question that way. And then I would ask it from another perspective. And it said, oh, here's an encyclopedia worth of stuff. And I was like, so it won't answer questions from one angle, but it'll answer all the questions from a separate angle. I said, that's definitely a piece of bias. And then when people started saying that AI was going to train on stuff that's available on the net, and then we're publishing content now at an exponential rate that's AI generated, and it keeps generating content eventually based on its own content, how much further until none of that content is really true?
Yeah.
Like I really worry because there's a lot of hallucinations and all these
Sure.
things that they talk about with AI. And I go, so when I use AI, I only use AI on things that I consider myself to be knowledgeable, almost a quasi-expert in. Mm-hmm. I use it to like maybe make the outline, maybe expand the outline, and then I proof it, adjust it, and edit it from there. Often there are mistakes or there's verbiage or there's words I would not have selected.
Yeah.
And it also writes at a grade level that's usually outside my scope of influence. So a lot of times I have to adjust the wording so that it meets my projected audience at their grade level for reading. Yeah. So there's a lot of work to do with AI. Like people go, oh, it's so easy. Just plug it in and go. And it's like, no, it's not really how you use it. It's a great tool and it can save you time. But if you really use it correctly, you're going to come out with a superior product, but it's going to take almost as much time.
Yeah, I agree. Kurt, thanks for hanging out today. Where do you want folks to go to say thanks?
Well, mañananomas.com is where I want everybody to go and visit sooner or later. That's the website for us, mañananomas.com. That's like tomorrow, no more. It's because I believe we should get everything done yesterday. But if it's on a personal thing and you just want to connect, I'm the only Kurt von Ahnen on LinkedIn. It makes me super easy to find. Kurt von Ahnen, LinkedIn, hit the connection button to connect, and we'll connect, maybe have a conversation.